Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Okay, good morning.
We are learning Mishna Rosh Hashanah, Perek Beis, Chapter 2, Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. Okay, here we go. How do we examine the witnesses? Our witnesses are coming into Beis Din. We have to examine them. All witnesses are examined. Anytime witnesses come and testify about something, they're examined. And the way they're examined is that you don't examine them both at the same time, because they could feed off the other one. Therefore, each one is brought in separately, and the elder one, the one who's older, is brought in first and honor as part of the privilege of his older age. So, how do we check out? How do we examine the witnesses? Zug Shaba Rishon, the pair that came first. You examine them first. We bring in the older one of the two. We say to him, Emar, tell us, how did you see the moon? Lifnei hachama, in front of the sun, or away from the sun. Now, what that means is like this. The crescent, right, of the new moon is always facing the sun, right? Because that's where that's where it gets its light from, right? The side of the moon is reflected from the sun. So the crescent is always going to be facing towards the moon, the sun, and the missing part is going to be facing away. So we asked this guy, and the way I understand this is happening, at the earliest point where you could recognize the new moon, which is like around sunset. And we say to him like this: so did you see the crescent facing the sun, or was it facing away from the sun? Let me show you these pictures just in case you don't get what we're saying. Okay, this is diagram A, right? Diagram A, right? Mm-hmm. That is where the crescent is facing towards the sun, right? Diagram B, just in the picture, the crescent is facing away from the sun. Mm-hmm. It's the missing part facing towards the sun. Yeah. Now let me ask you a question. Is that possible for the missing part to be facing the sun? No, of course not. It's not possible. It's not possible. And that's the point of the question. We asked this person, this guy walks in, looks all smart, all smug, and all ready to testify. And we say, so which way was the crescent facing? Towards the sun or away from the sun? Well, depending on what he answers, we know either he knows what he's talking about or he is clueless or lying. Okay, so, Emar, Kezri Salavana, how'd you see the moon? Lifnei hachama, the crescent facing towards the sun, that means before the sun, or la'achar hachama, or after or behind the sun, meaning away from the sun. Next, another question. Another question was, Litzfain or Lidreima, to the north or to the south? Now, this is explained in the following way. Let me read to you. Since the moon reflects the light of the sun, no, I'm looking at the wrong one, close to sunset, the new moon always appears above the western horizon, right? That's because that's where the sun is. But it may be either on the southern side of the sky or the northern side. On the basis of astronomical calculations, the court knew on which side it should appear at that time of the year. If the witness's statement does not match the court's calculation, his testimony is rejected. So again, they have a little picture here. It's not major, but the point is that in this picture, the bottom part, the gray part, that is due west. Okay, and now you could have the sun on either one or two sides, the north or the south. Mm-hmm. Any one of them could be correct theoretically. It depends on the time of the year. And therefore, we're going to ask him based on the Beis Din, the High Court is going to ask him based on their calculations where it should be. Where do you see it? And depending if what he says comes out with their calculations or not, will tell us whether we accept or reject his testimony. Next, Kama Haya. Did I skip something here? No. Kama Haya Gavaya. How high was it? Now, how high was it means that basically we say to him like this. We say to this witness, imagine, right, 1 second. Yeah, the witness is asked how high the moon appeared above the horizon. For example, whether it seemed as high as a building at a certain distance from the witness of 2 stories or 3 stories. mean, we like telling like this. Imagine there's a building here, right? Imagine there's a building at a certain distance, right? So when you saw the sign at when you saw the new moon at a certain height, how high was it? 2 stories, 3 stories. And the point really has to be, if I understand correctly, that they have to let's say both of them, one says 2 stories, one says 3 stories. That's not the end of the world. That's close enough to say that their testimony is still concurring. However, as the Bartenura says, but if the discrepancy is already 2 stories, 2 rows, then already we say, that means they're not concurring enough to be able to accept them. But the point is, we're trying to ask them to tell us how high up was it, and the point would be that have to be giving him some kind of an idea, like, well, you're standing here and there's a building there. How high was it? Okay, that's Kamaya Gavaya. That's what it means. How high was it? Ula ayin hayanoita. Okay, which means which way was it pointing? Which way was it pointing? Now that means like this. The Beis Din asks whether the horns, the tips of the crescent, were pointing north or south. When the new moon appears to the left of the sun, its horns point south, and when it appears to the right of the sun, its horns point north. So again, look at this picture. Okay, in both picture, the full part, the crescent, right, is facing towards the sun. That's not the problem here. But here the question is the points, what they call the horns. Which way are they? Which way are they going? Because depending on where the sun is, that'll make a difference to which direction the horns are pointing. If the moon is to the left of the sun, then they're going to be facing south. And if they are to the right, if they're to the left of the sun, they're going to be facing south. And if they are to the right of the sun, they'll be facing north. Like you have in these pictures here. Okay. These pictures. All right. And again, this is all based on calculation. The Beis Din is going to know, based on their calculations, where the new moon, where those horns of the new moon are going to be facing towards. The Kama Hayarochav. How wide was it? Here it means the witness is asked to estimate the width of the crescent, which is very narrow at the beginning of the month and gets wider as the month progresses, right? For example, they ask him whether the crescent appeared as wide as a barley corn held at a certain distance away or 2 barley corns, meaning it's very small, right? From your point, this is a very small, you can't, you're far away from it. So you're seeing it in miniature, right? But the point is going to be that, they're going to say to him, so how wide was it? Was it that small or a little bit bigger? And apparently here again, it's going to be Beis Din's calculation to know what is the correct answer. So the Gemara, that Mishna continues and says, Im Amar lefnei hachama, if the person said in front of the sun, which means saying before, that means to say that the Im Amar lefnei hachama, if he said it was in front of the sun, which means, getting a little confused here. Right. If the witness says, here it means, if the person says that the moon's unlit part was turned towards the sun, right? Not the crescent itself, but the unlit part is facing, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but it means the unlit part is what's facing the sun. Lo yamar klum. He said nothing because it's impossible. So we know that he's completely off. Right. Now the Mishnah doesn't tell us, the truth is that if he goes wrong in any of the questions we just mentioned, right, his testimony is thrown out. The reason why the Mishnah just spoke about the first case, which was the case of where is the unlit part facing, is because that one is either right or wrong, right? It's right or wrong all the time. The other ones, as we said, are all based on the calculations of the Beis Din as to what the real answers are for them are. And therefore, it didn't mention them explicitly, but it's the same idea. If you get the answer wrong, then your testimony is thrown out. Just that if it's wrong about where the unlit part is facing, so then there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to talk about ever. The other ones, it all depends on the time of the year and their calculations. Right. Next, we then bring in the second witness, and we examine him. We ask him the same questions. If their words concur, edusan kayemes, then their testimony is accepted. Now, it's interesting that the way they say it here is like this. When it says, if the words are consistent, they explain that there are no serious contradictions between the two witnesses. The testimony is valid. Meaning, they don't have to be perfect. Like we said, one is a 2 stories, one is 3 stories. That kind of discrepancy or that kind of inconsistency doesn't invalidate. It has to be something more. It has to be something that is more, that is a greater inconsistency to say, okay, this already, then they're not seeing the same thing. They're not saying the same thing. And I'm going to assume that there are other details involved in these questions, or that revolve around these questions, that are also going to be asked. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. Because the next part of the Mishnah says, all right, so basically let's say we pulled in the first 2 witnesses and they concur, they're consistent, bang, we have witnesses. We're all ready to go. What do you do with the other 50 that are waiting there in the courtyard? You say, come outside and say, like when there's no case for the jury, where they say you thank you for coming and send you home. Here, what happens is like this. Ushar kalazugais. When it comes to the other pairs, shayalin oisem rashay devarim, we ask them the rashay devarim. That means we ask them the main points of their testimony without going into detail. Because that means Rashay Devarim. Rashay Devarim means it's the main points, right? Not because they needed them, so they don't leave disappointed. So that they'll come back. And if they're going to schlep here and we're not even going to bother with them, then they're not going to bother coming back. So therefore, we're going to ask them the main questions. We're not going to go into all the details. Now, what do all the details mean exactly? I mean, we had 4 questions here, right? We had 4 questions, and the answers are, seem to be pretty straightforward, other than the discrepancies about 2 stories or 3 stories. So I'm assuming that there are other questions that we ask them along. I don't know if there's going to be another mission that's going to say that, but there are going to be other questions that we're going to ask them that aren't mentioned here, because what we mentioned here are the main questions. There are other details maybe that revolve around these questions that we're going to ask them. The witnesses that we consider that it'll be possible that we will actually use them, we will ask them the main questions and the details. But the other witnesses that we don't need, we're not going to go into so much details. But we will go through, as they say, the main points, meaning the main questions, which I understand that to mean these questions we're going to ask them. Why? So they shouldn't be disheartened. So I was just wondering, so at the end of the day, right? They're not going to realize that they weren't needed. Do they think they're the ones being used? I mean, somebody's going to come out, right? After the 2 witnesses are going to come, do the 2 witnesses are really used, and we kind of lock them up, right? Don't go outside. Don't say anything to anybody. Bring everybody in. We'll ask them a few questions. We'll make them think that we're using them, right? I mean, at some point in time, maybe they'll figure this out after a couple of times. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if the explanation here may just be that, again, we have 2 witnesses, it's sufficient. Yeah. But the more testimony we have, and the more that we corroborate what the original witnesses are saying, just the better it is, right? Everybody feels more confident. Everybody feels more secure with their decisions. So luckily, you don't need it all. Yeah. But by asking the witnesses their questions, we're not going into details, and we ask them the basic questions. If at the end of the day, we are able to really confirm and corroborate what that other witnesses saying the same thing, then it makes it strengthens and reinforces the decision. And therefore, it's not like they're doing nothing. They are serving a purpose. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Well, the other thing is that